So yesterday, I took a group to Holiday World. Have any of you ever been to Holiday World? Show of hands. A lot of you have been to Holiday World. Then you're familiar with this Santa Claus that's right there when you enter Holiday World. Very famous, familiar spot to get to the group picture. We went to Holiday World and had a great group, had a lot of fun. I don't know what it is. I told myself, I knew I was preaching 2 times this morning, and I told myself, pace yourself, Mark, pace yourself. Whenever I go to amusement parks, I love roller coasters. Any other roller coaster lovers in the house this morning? I love roller coasters, and my normal for whenever I get on the roller coaster is just, I just lose myself, and I just scream, and I go crazy. I'm the guy like arms up the whole time, and I'm just going nuts. Usually by the end of the amusement park trip visit, I have zero voice, and I'm just wiped out completely. I did okay, I'll say that. I don't know what it is about roller coasters, but when I get on those things, I just lose my self-control, and like it's a struggle for me, right? So there was a lot of screaming and yelling, but I tried to temper it down. That is the reason if my voice sounds a little bit lower, maybe a little scratchy this morning, I apologize for that. Whenever we take trips like this, we always gather the kids together before we get into the park or right after we get in, and just kind of go over the ground rules really, really quick. Remember, stay hydrated, be sure to eat lunch, don't be an idiot, like behave, right? Don't do anything that I wouldn't do, those sorts of things. But then we remind them what's most important, what matters most. And the number one rule, if you've ever been a part of like the fun events that we try to do with youth groups, if you've ever been a part of those, you probably know this. The number one rule is have fun, right? I mean, it's what matters most. So at the end of the day, that's my question. Did you have fun? If you did, then mission accomplished, right? Mission accomplished. It's what matters most. In Scripture, we read these words, above all else. Now, important detail for us to know this morning is who wrote these words. These words were penned by a guy who happened to be the wisest person ever, right? Now, you may know a wise person or two, but this guy, he takes the crown. He was the wisest person ever. Solomon wrote about a lot of things, money, marriage, relationships, work, and it's all good. But in Proverbs, he says, there's one thing that I don't want you to miss. Above all else, this is what matters most. We're now in week 5 of this Guardrails series that we've been in. If you're like me, you're grateful for the foundation for these messages from Andy Stanley, and that includes this morning's message. If you've missed a week, I encourage you, go back on Facebook or YouTube and check out, catch yourself up on the first 4 weeks in this Guardrails series. We've said this every week. Guardrails are a system designed to keep vehicles from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas. Right? We understand guardrails are never set up in the danger zone. Rather, they're always set up in the safety zone. The closer guardrails are set in the danger zone, we understand the chances of experiencing danger increase. Right? Guardrails are in place to direct us. They're in place to protect us. Right? They minimize damage. Highways and curves are not the only place that we need guardrails in our lives. Beyond the context of the physical guardrails, right, that we have in life on the highways and the byways, we understand we need a different kind of guardrails in our lives. Guardrails are a personal standard a personal standard of behavior that becomes a matter of conscience. It helps us to feel easy before it's too late or other people become hurt, right, because of our words or our actions. We said this, our greatest regrets could have been avoided if we would have had some guardrails in our life. Now, as we grow up in life, we become well acquainted with this idea, modifying our behavior. As kids, we learn what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And as parents, we hope sooner rather than later they begin to learn to modify their behavior based on our expectations. We grow up and go to school and we realize in the classroom there's expectations. And we learn how to modify our behavior. We start a new school and there's new rules and new expectations. We get a job. We go to college. We get married. We come across expectations that require us to modify our behavior. And then out of nowhere, every once in a while, right, we can say and do the dumbest things. Have you or someone you know ever found yourself saying something like, I don't know where that came from? That's not me. Am I the only person? Have you ever been there before? Like, where did that come from? What happened to me? So this morning we're going to talk about where does that come from, right? The Solomon says this, above all else, guard your heart. Guard your heart. Guarding your heart is so important. Why? Why is guarding your heart so important? For, say this word with me, everything, right? Everything you do flows from it. What if that is true? What if everything originates from within? If that is the case, whatever within is, right, it's really, really important for us to be mindful of guarding that part so that the out part, right, isn't impacted in ways that we don't want it to be. This is super, super important. So what does it look like to guard your heart? About 1,000 years later, after Solomon wrote these words, Jesus is doing his thing with his disciples. And wherever Jesus went, you have to understand, when you read Scripture, you see this all throughout the Gospels. There was a crowd that followed Jesus wherever he went. Now, part of that crowd was religious leaders and priests, scribes, and teachers. The crowds were generally interested in what Jesus was up to. They liked seeing the miracles and those things. These religious leaders, though, they were following Jesus for a different reason. They usually hung out on the outskirts of the crowd, but whenever they could slip to the front, they would generally ask Jesus a question. You see this over and over and over throughout the Gospels. They would ask Jesus a question, and they were interested in Jesus' answer, but they would oftentimes ask these questions in order to trick Jesus. They were hopeful that they could trick Jesus and get him isolated from this crowd in order to arrest him. You see, they weren't really that thrilled about what Jesus was doing and what his message was all about. So they were trying to trick him. So in Matthew 15, we have one of these questions, right? They come up, make their way to the front of the crowd, and they ask Jesus, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat. Now, we've been reminded lately, when I say lately, I mean like the last year and a half, right? The importance of washing our hands. But this seems a bit more alarming for these leaders than some people merely forgetting to wash their hands. Why are they so upset, right? So in the Old Testament law, the priests had to do ceremonial washing to make sure they were always ready to do God's work. Your hands had to constantly be cleaned, again, if you were a religious leader. It was a law for them. These religious leaders had turned it into a command for everybody, not just themselves. Everybody must do these washings. And it probably wasn't a bad idea, but the law didn't teach the command for everyone, right? They took the tradition reserved for religious leaders and made it a law for everybody. Jesus clearly understands what's going on, right? He gets the picture. He understands. He isn't fazed. Here's his reply. And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? Right? He asked them a question back, very rabbinical of him, right? Jesus says, you're accusing me of breaking a tradition that isn't a command of God. You are breaking a command of God that is supposed to be a tradition. It's actually a man-made tradition. It was a guardrail that these religious leaders had set up. But setting up this guardrail in their own lives and in their own teachings violated a law of God. Now imagine a father telling his son or daughter, You will not be disrespectful to your mom. Maybe some of you have had that similar conversation, right? And the son or daughter decides, I'm going to set up a guardrail. I'm not going to speak it to her at all. That way, I won't be disrespectful, right? That's a guardrail that the teenage son or daughter decides to set up. That's setting up a guardrail in order to keep a rule, but the new rule actually violates the rule, being respectful to your parents. Does that make sense, right? Right? You understand, right? This rule that they make actually violates the rule. So what's Jesus talking about with these religious leaders? He goes on, for God said, honor your father and mother, but you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father and mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father and mother with it. For Jesus' audience, this made sense, right? They knew what he was talking about. But if you're like me, like the first time reading this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what is he talking about? So here's what Jesus is referencing. The religious leaders had made up a tradition that allowed them to violate the law and the commandment. This is one of the 10, right? Honor your father and your mother. The rule was this. In those days, you could dedicate all of your possessions, right? Everything that you owned, you could dedicate it to the temple. According to this tradition, as long as you were living, you could use what you owned or what was in your possession, right, to support your household. So this rule of dedicating what you owned to the temple, right, allowed them and maybe encouraged them not to be as generous as they were called to be. If someone were to come up and ask them, right, hey, can you help me out with this? Hey, can I borrow this? They would respond with, I've already given everything to the temple. No giving while I'm living, right? Now, some of you have dealt with aging parents, right? And you know what that situation causes in your life. Just imagine, with all of the advances that we have at this point, just imagine being an aging parent 2,000 years ago, right? An aging parent might come up to one of these people, religious leaders, and ask for some help, right? For some support. And perhaps a common response from these religious leaders would be, I would love to help you, but I've already dedicated it to God, right? Jesus is having none of that. Here's what he says. Thus, you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition, you hypocrites. Right? He loves to call these religious leaders that word, right? You hypocrites. Jesus tells them they've come up with a tradition or a rule that allowed them to get by without obeying God's command to honor your father and your mother. So at this point in the conversation for the religious leaders is over. They're like, oh, man, didn't get them on that one, right? They think back, they're looking at each other like, whose idea was it to ask him that question? Not mine, you're right. I mean, they just go away, right, for the moment. Now, Jesus turns to the crowd, and he wants to make sure that they fully understand what this conversation was all about. So he turns to the crowd, and he says these words. Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them or make them unclean, right? The issue was touching unclean things and then putting food in their mouth. Certain things were viewed as unclean in the Old Testament dietary laws. Jesus wants them to understand what you eat does not make you unworthy to God. This was a brand new idea, right? The Old Testament law was all about staying clean and pure in your relationship with God, right? All the dietary laws was about remaining pure, right? Remaining clean. And in many ways, the law in the Old Testament was all about making sure God is happy, this vertical relationship, eyes to the sky. We want to make sure that God is happy, as well as even the laws that were about how do we interact and how do we relate to others, right? Even those laws for the people in their mindset was all about how do I make sure God isn't angry with me? How do I make sure God is happy? So Jesus says there's more to the law than just this vertical relationship, right? What comes out of their mouth is what defiles them or makes them unclean. So what comes out of our mouths? Words, right? And words affect people. And it's what's already in there that comes out that's the problem. God is more bothered by what we say than what we eat. Shortly after, the crowd has dissipated, and it's just Jesus and his 12 guys, right? So Peter invites Jesus to explain a little bit more exactly what he was talking about. I like the picture. I don't know if you do or not, but Peter's like, hey, Jesus, I completely understood what you were talking about earlier, but I don't know if all these guys, are on the same page. Why don't you just, Jesus, why don't you just explain just so they understand, right? So here's what Jesus says. Are you still so dull? Wouldn't you want to be one of the disciples in that moment, right? Jesus is like, are you crazy? Are you still so dull? Don't you see whatever enters the mouth and into the stomach then comes out of the body? Everybody following so far? Yeah, okay, I get that, Jesus, right, I get that. And then Jesus gets serious, and he says this, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them, right? These defile them. The things that puts a person at odds with God is not what goes in, but what comes out. It's not about what you eat, but how the words that you speak affect God and people, right? So when you offend someone, that offends God. Why? Because people matter to God. And when you offend someone that matters to God with your words, right, that offends God. This was brand new territory for the people of God. Jesus goes on to say these words. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality. These are all theft, right, activities, right? False testimony, slander, right? These are what defiles a person. Why do these things defile people? Because they hurt people. When you hurt people that God loves, it offends God. What Jesus is reminding them is this relationship with God is more than just about the vertical relationship, but your relationship with others matter. They matter. These are what defiles a person, right? So what makes God upset? Mistreating other people puts us at odds with God. So what about the dietary laws? Right? In the Old Testament, Jesus says, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. If what offends God is what offends people, and if what offends people comes from our hearts, then it matters whether or not we guard our hearts, right? So here's the bottom line. Our behavior will eventually mirror our hearts, and our hearts will eventually show up in our behavior. It's really good. Let me say it one more time. Our behavior will eventually mirror our hearts. Our hearts will eventually show up in our behavior. We know this to be true. I think we know this. How do we know this to be true? We've heard about people who have lost a lot just because of what they said. We've all heard about those people, right? We've heard about people that have lost everything just because of what they did. We know people who have lost careers because of what they said, marriages that have been burned because of what comes out of here, right? People have alienated children because of how they behaved in the home, right? Destroyed a marriage because of the way that they behaved outside the home. We can modify behavior all day long, but until we take care of the heart, right? Set up guardrails, we will wind up one day asking ourselves, what happened, right? Where did that come from? That's not me. That's not who I am. That's not how I was raised. Where does it come from? It comes from the heart. I don't want that to be me. I don't want that to be you. God doesn't want us to reach that point in life. So what does it look like to guard our heart? We're going to look at 4 emotions that should light up our conscience. When our minds start to go down these trails, we have guardrails in place. We will see alert, like flashing lights. Well, hello, pay attention, right? We'll know that we have some work to do because if we don't deal with these on the inside, it will eventually come out. Andy Stanley, one of the things that he says is this it's really good. Internal tensions that deserve or demand our attention, right? That's what these 4 emotions are. So here they are: guilt, anger, greed, and jealousy. When you feel it, any of these, right? When you identify with it, you have work to do. There's something in you that has potential to create chaos outside of you. Our tendency, perhaps, is to wait until we say something, and then I'll take care of it, right? Wait until something happens. That's putting a guardrail in the danger zone. We want to set up the guardrail in the safety zone. We start by paying attention when there's an internal tension. So let's talk about guilt. Guilt says this: I owe you. I owe you an apology. I took something from you. You may not even know about it, but I owe you. Here's a danger zone when it comes to guilt. It often leads to, and if this is you, again, alert, alert, alert. It often leads to secret keeping. It often leads to distance, distancing yourself from those people, quite often, and more often than not, those people that matter most to you, right? What's wrong? Nothing. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything all right? I'm fine, right? Right? Distancing yourself from those people usually that matter most to you. It's easy for guilt to make its way into our relationships. Let's talk about anger. Anger says this: you owe me, right? You owe me. You hurt me. You took something from me. You pay me back, right? Or I'll pay you back. Here's the thing about anger: it leaks. Anger is not stationary. It is mobile. It leaks into our other relationships, right? Anger is never isolated to the relationship of origin. Anger eats us up on the inside. Maybe you've heard the old adage, hurt people, right? It's true. Hurt people. It's true. So what's the danger zone? What's one of the danger zones when it comes to anger? You were hurt as a kid. Something happened at the last job that you had. Maybe how that relationship ended. Maybe how you broke up, right? Anger says, I'm going to hold this over you, and I'm going to hold it over anyone who reminds me of you. Long after you are out of my life, I'm going to hold other people hostage because of what you took from me. It's a danger zone. It's a danger zone. Let's talk about greed. Greed says this: I owe me, right? I owe me. Pastor Ken talked about this last week. So if you have not heard week 4 of this series, I encourage you, again, go back and listen to it. He said greed is the assumption that it is all for my consumption, right? As much as my heart goes out for them, I'm not going to write that check, right? As much as I know they need help, I'm not going to give up my time or cross the street, right? So the danger zone for greed is the people in our lives will begin to feel like they are competing with our stuff, right? You know, the stuff that's behind the glass in the cabinet, right? The stuff that, oh, be careful, don't touch, don't get too close, right? The stuff in our life, when others begin to, or when people in our lives feel like they're competing with our stuff, when your children feel like they're competing with your stuff, with your hobby, with your collection, you may have a greed problem. Let's talk about jealousy. It says, life owes me, right? Life owes me. Somebody got what I deserve. He got what I deserve. And if you're struggling with jealousy, you know it's almost impossible to genuinely be nice to them, right? Here's a danger zone for jealousy. And this is really, really bad, really, really bad. I find myself secretly celebrating someone else's loss or failure. I mean, we would never do that out loud, right? We would never do that in the open, but secretly, inwardly, we see that person lose or fail, and inwardly, we get a little bit giddy about it. If that is in you or me, it should set off alarm bells. Caution, caution, caution. So when you feel it or you see it, and we're talking about guilt, anger, greed, or jealousy, you've got to address it, because if you don't, it will leak out of you, right? When someone else perhaps points one of these out to you and you say, no, that's not me, and you walk away and you go, yep, that was me, right? You've got to address it. or it's going to come out. So what do we do? This is the beautiful thing, I think, about setting up guardrails in our lives and following Jesus. Following Jesus makes your life better and makes you better at life, right? I tell my students that I get to work with all the time, God's desires for your life are best. We're not just talking about a good life that we think God wants for you. We believe God's desires for your life are best. I truly believe these next few thoughts and these next few minutes together, if we really take to heart and set up some guardrails in our life, it will make us a better spouse, a better friend, a better employee, a better employer. These things don't necessarily make sense, perhaps emotionally in the moment, but at the end of the day, you will experience a freedom and a peace that perhaps you've never experienced before in your life. So what do we do about guilt? Confess. Confess. Is God interested in hearing about your heart? Yes, but catch this. He already knows, right? God isn't surprised, right? God isn't surprised. Do we need to confess things to God? Absolutely. Hear me this morning. But what I'm talking about more than that this morning is confess to someone who is in your life. Ultimately, the goal is to confess to that person, right, who you stole from. But maybe you're at a point in life where that's just not possible. I can't do that just yet. Maybe you start with just somebody else. Hey, I need to confess this to you. By confessing to anyone, right, doors perhaps will be open for down the road where a conversation might be able to be had with the person you hurt. Does that conversation hurt? Does that conversation, perhaps, does it damage your reputation? Might it sting your marriage, hopefully temporarily? Maybe. Yeah, probably, right? Remember, guardrails don't alleviate damage, right? They just help keep damage to a minimum. The longer you hold on to guilt, right, the more damage that awaits when it leaks, right? Secrets suck the life out of us, right? Secrets suck the passion and the life out of a relationship. You're going to have to swallow your pride in order to confess, right? But get it out. Get rid of it, right? Tell guilt, you will not master me anymore. When we confess, there's a good chance that there's going to be some chaos out here, right? But the inward peace that you will experience far outweighs the mess that you may have to deal with. So what do we do about anger, right? We forgive. We forgive. It's imperative we identify what was taken from me. And if you struggle with anger, I encourage you, maybe even just write this down, right? What was it that person stole from you? And then you decide, they don't know me anymore, right? It's not enough to say, I had a terrible dad, a terrible mom, I had a terrible boss, a terrible friend. Ask yourself, what did they take from me? And then make a decision. You don't owe me this anymore. I'm canceling the debt. That's what forgiveness is, right? I'm canceling a debt. You might say, I'm letting them off the hook. You are. You are. That's why it's hard, right? That's why it's hard. That's why it doesn't feel good. You're letting somebody else off the hook. But you know who else you're letting off the hook? You, right? You're letting you off the hook because you're digging up all of this anger that is in your heart. And by saying, I will not be ruled by this anymore, right? You are setting yourself free. I'm not carrying this anymore to my other relationships, the way that I parent my kids, the way that I engage in my other relationships. I'm not carrying around anger anymore, right? You don't owe me this anymore. I'm done with it. You're forgiven. What do we do about greed? Give, right? Give. We write a big to you check, right? May not be big to the person that's sitting next to you, but to you, it's a big check. I'm writing a check to this nonprofit. They didn't even ask for it, right? Or greed is going to control me no longer, right? Find something precious, right? Find something precious to you, something, not a someone, right? Something to sell, right? Sell it and give the money away. These objects are not going to control my life anymore. I'm not about stuff that somebody else will eventually sell for cheaper than I want them to when I'm gone, right? Because of the way those things impacted our relationship. I'm not against stuff. Hear me this morning, right? I'm not against collecting things. But when collections or stuff become the priority over people, we have a greed problem. And we need to give. So what do we do about jealousy? We said earlier, jealousy is this thought and this idea that life owes me. But if we want to get at the root of it, right, it's probably better to say this. We believe that God owes me, right? God owes me. It really has nothing to do with a roommate, with an in-law, with a coworker, with a friend. It has to do with what you think God owes you and God didn't give you. Life happens. And God takes what happens when we offer it to him and does things with things that come our way, things unexpected. And when we give it to God and ask him to do whatever he pleases to do with it, it pleases him, right? Pleases him. And you know where we can see this in our world? Have you ever seen Christians who struggle and suffer? When they handle it the right way, you've seen the proper way to handle life. Life happens, right? We understand that. But instead of becoming bitter, instead of comparing their bad fortune to everyone else's good fortune, somehow they take what is offered to them by life and just offer it to God. Well, this isn't exactly what I signed up for, but God, will you take it and do what only you can do? Will you help me continue to trust and to lean on you? I don't know what tomorrow holds. I'm struggling to know what the next hour is going to look like. Would you just reveal yourself? Everything we have and are belongs to you. May you receive the glory, right? We have so much respect for those people that live it out. Why? Because they just don't compare their lives to somebody else's. God, this is what happens, right? This is what happens. When life happens, we just take it, right? And realize it all belongs to God anyways. Just give it to God and allow him to do whatever he pleases with it and with us. So how do we respond to jealousy? We celebrate. We celebrate what God has given us, and we celebrate what God has given others. Catch this, out loud. That's not always easy, right? We do it out loud. So we make that phone call. Congrats on that promotion. As you know, I was hoping to get it, but I am genuinely happy that you got it. Right? I mean, that may be how that conversation goes, right? That's you telling jealousy, you don't live in my heart anymore. You say in that moment, I don't feel it, right? It doesn't matter. You're going to behave your way past these things that have potential to pollute your heart and your soul. So who has what you think you deserve? Celebrate them out loud. So a very simple question just to wrap up our time this morning. How's your heart? Is everything okay with your heart, right? How's your heart? How's your heart? What's going on in the inside? Like everybody can see the outside and everybody thinks everything's good, but what's going on in the inside? Set up some guardrails if you haven't already. And determine today, I'm not going to let guilt and anger and greed and jealousy master me anymore. If it's in there, you're living in the danger zone, and it's going to come out. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it.